With the sheer amount of content that Marvel has been pushing out lately, it's becoming harder and harder for me to keep being excited for any of it, especially with how much of a letdown some of the Phase 4 stuff has been so far. Their newest show, however, was something much different with a lot of promise. Of course, I'm talking about Moon Knight, which just concluded its first season. I was genuinely quite excited for this show, and it did not disappoint. But I think my enjoyment of Moon Knight has revealed a major problem with the other Disney Plus shows. So this video is going to be both a review for the first season of Moon Knight and kind of a short little video essay about the problems with the Marvel Disney Plus shows. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it. Alright, now let's get into it. So I've been a big comics fan for a while now. I love Spider-Man, X-Men, Daredevil comics, but I've never read any Moon Knight comics before. So going into this show, I didn't really know what to expect. It ended up being so much different than the other Marvel shows and really anything else Marvel has put out. The first 3 episodes do a great job building up this little mystery, and they all end up leaving me wanting more every week. The direction and the pacing in the first few episodes specifically are very well done because of the shifting personalities and the time shifts. In the middle episodes, when Steven and Mark communicate with each other through reflections, it's well shot, and I liked how we got to see reflections in places you wouldn't normally think of. The story starts to get a little slow around episode 4 when Mark loses his powers and they are exploring this tomb. Even though the first half of this episode is one of the weakest points of the series, it easily has the best ending. In episodes 4, 5, and 6, we get to go inside Mark and Steven's mind where they manifest the afterlife as a psych ward. We get to see them relive their memories to purify their hearts and reach the Field of Reeds, which is like the Egyptian equivalent of heaven, basically. This was easily my favorite part of the whole show, and it really gave us an insight into the characters. All of the parts in the psych ward have great editing and make it feel completely mind-bending. It was so fun to watch because obviously we know everything we have seen already has to be real, but the more times it cuts back to the psych ward, the more I started to question what was really going on. The final episode wraps up the dynamic between them nicely, but I do like that it immediately gets screwed up again when we're introduced to the third personality of Jake Lockley. One thing that makes this show stand out from other superhero action-adventure stuff is the Egyptian gods and afterlife. It was cool that Khonshu, Ammit, and the other gods had characters of their own and were more than just faceless beings controlling their avatars. But what really brings this whole show together better than anything else is Oscar Isaac. He absolutely killed it in this role and did a great job selling the different personalities of Mark and Steven. I love that he decided to do the British accent because that made it that much more convincing. But he also had every little detail of the characters down to their cadence and mannerisms. It takes a lot of talent to act alongside yourself, so clearly they picked the right guy for the job. Ethan Hawke as Harrow is a great choice too. He's a very good actor, and the fact that he signed on to a Marvel project in the first place said something about it right off the bat. As much as I love a good sympathetic villain, we've seen so many of them lately that it was nice to just see Harrow as a crazy religious cultist willing to kill innocent people without a second thought. I like that even once he released Ammit, he never backed down and was ready to die if that's what she wanted. Layla was also a pretty well-written character. The relationship between her and Mark was great, and I'm glad they didn't just turn her into another generic MCU love interest, because we have had plenty of those. The whole thing about her father that kept being brought up didn't really lead to much, but I'm guessing it'll come up again in the future. Her becoming the avatar of Taweret in the final episode was a fun and unexpected reveal. It was nice that we were mainly following the main 4 characters of Mark, Steven, Layla, and Harrow. Sometimes when these things start juggling too many characters, it can be hard to get attached to any of them. Eternals. One of the weaker parts of Moon Knight is the action. My favorite part of this show was the character stuff between Mark and Steven, and them figuring out how to coexist in the same body. So when the action stuff was happening, it could feel a little underwhelming at times. It works great in the first 2 episodes where we are only seeing it sparingly, but once you get into episode 3, it starts to get a little messy. And I don't mean messy in a good way like the intentional scrappiness of Daredevil, I mostly mean just directionless. The choreography itself is quite good, but I think the direction and the editing do it no justice whatsoever. Like specifically looking at this one scene from episode 3 where they're fighting on this weird fenced area with sand, it starts off really cool with Moon Knight catching all these guys' bullets with his cape and then throwing them back at them, and then chucking his little batarang things everywhere. But after this, it starts to get very hard to follow. The cuts are happening so quickly that you can't really tell what's happening, and it also takes away all of the weight out of the combat. This is a problem that a lot of modern blockbusters have, where the editing can get in the way of making an impactful fight scene. You want the camera to follow the motions fluidly so that we can feel like we're right in the thick of things, and it helps to have longer takes to increase the tension and highlight the choreography. Marvel has done a great job at this before, like obviously with Daredevil, but even in The Winter Soldier. The biggest thing holding back these fight scenes in Moon Knight is the over-reliance on CGI. Obviously, sometimes CGI is a must to make people fly through the air and use crazy magic, but when you have a guy running around throwing punches, practical stunts work so much better. There are some moments in these fights that just don't seem real, and that is very distracting. It's not like the CGI is bad in this show, it's generally pretty good, and I think the suit looks awesome, but it could have been used a lot less. I hate to sound like a broken record, but if you want to convey the intensity of a hand-to-hand fight scene, they need to embrace the raw brutality like they did in Daredevil. So getting into what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, what is the one thing that has been holding back all of these Disney Plus series so far? To put it very simply, it's about expectations. To explain what I mean, we're going to start by looking at where it all began. And by began, I mean the first show, WandaVision. For me and many other Marvel fans, WandaVision was an exciting time. As fun as a new movie is, having a show with the same characters and production level to look forward to every week was really cool. I wasn't excited for it at first, but then it ended up being super interesting and different than anything we'd seen before. Like many others, I was on the edge of my seat waiting every week to see what would happen next. I was reading about the comics the show seemed to be based on and all of these fan theories that became even more likely every week. I remember people saying that Evan Peters was the beginning of the X-Men in the MCU, that Mephisto was behind the whole thing, and that we'd see appearances from characters like Doctor Strange, Magneto, and Mr. Fantastic. Little did we know this would be the beginning of the end. When the show ended on an underwhelming note and went against all of the speculation, it was very disappointing. This is no fault of the show itself for the most part, it was due to the extremely high expectations of fans. Even after how disappointing the WandaVision finale was, people continued to speculate about these crazy theories for the other shows and even the movies. This leads to people looking into every single detail in the marketing, on Twitter, all the post-credit scenes, and all this other crap. Obviously, this is something that always happened, but I think it's even worse now because everyone is doing it, and now people are always hoping for surprise reveals and cameos. But it's also because the lead up to a new show is inherently different than a movie. When you go to the movies, you get all of it in one sitting, but with these shows, you only get to watch an hour of it every week. Every episode leaves on a big cliffhanger and creates even more expectations for the next one, and more time to speculate in between them. And it doesn't help that they cram these shows into this tight 6-episode format. So this is the problem with these shows so far. But for me, I didn't have these same problems watching Moon Knight, though it wasn't actually because of anything the show did differently. Like I said before, I had very little prior knowledge about Moon Knight going into this show, and that turned out to be the best way to enjoy it. I had no preconceived notions about how the story should end, how the characters should act, or anything. And even though I could have learned more about him beforehand, like I did for some of the other shows, it was much more enjoyable to take everything at face value. It's not going to be possible to go in without prior knowledge every time, but the point is that even if you've read the comics and know everything about a character, it will be much easier to enjoy a show or a movie if you can set aside your prior expectations the best you can. Expecting every comic adaptation to be completely faithful to the source material is just unrealistic, and we're setting ourselves up for failure by doing so. Personally, I'd rather Marvel try new things like they did with Moon Knight instead of poorly adapting beloved comic runs. So from now on, I'm going to be doing everything I can to avoid getting my expectations too high, and I urge all of you to do the same. Moon Knight was the most fun I've had with these Disney Plus shows so far, and even though there was a lot that could have been better, it was a nice change of pace. I'm going to give Moon Knight Season 1 an 8 out of 10, and hopefully there ends up being another season. Let me know what you thought of the show in the comments if you saw it, and what you thought of the other Disney Plus shows as well. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like and subscribe to see more like this, and you can check out this playlist right here to see my other Marvel reviews. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.